In the last part of this unit, you've looked at the various structures within the male reproductive system. You've labeled this image within the course notes and also looked at the function of the various portions. But let's take a look at the structure and function of the testes in more detail. If we were to zoom in on the testy, it has this structure. Looking at the various parts, we have the fibrous capsule around the outer portion of the testy. Within the testy, we have various lobules. Here we've marked the region that forms one lobule, and as you can see, there are many lobules throughout the testy. Inside each lobule, there are the seminiferous tubules. Let's take a look at a cross-section of the seminiferous tubule. Here's a cross-section of the tubule as if it was going in and out from the screen. What we can see is that around the outside of the tubule, we have interstitial cells. Within the tubule, we actually have sperm cells, and you can see here that within the middle of the tubule, there are formed sperm, and around the outer portion, there are precursor cells, cells that will develop into sperm cells. And that is the function overall of the seminiferous tubules. It's where we have the precursor sperm cells, and ultimately the sperm cells develop. Let's take a closer look at a sperm cell. Here we have a sperm cell, and there's a number of regions that we should look at. The first is the tail, which is a flagellum that moves around in order to propel the sperm. The tail, the flagellum, is attached to the body, the midpiece. Within the midpiece, there are many mitochondria that are there in order to produce ATP, energy, to allow for the flagellum to actually move and move the sperm. We have the head of the sperm, which ultimately is the nucleus of the sperm. It's containing the 23 chromosomes that ultimately the male will give to the offspring that is produced from that sperm. Over the top of that head, we have the acrosome. The acrosome is filled with digestive enzymes that allows the sperm to enter into the egg when it comes into contact with the egg. After the sperm are produced within the seminiferous tubules, they move to the epididymis. The interstitial cells around the seminiferous tubules release hormones that we'll take a look at in a moment that allow the sperm to develop properly. But the sperm moving out of the seminiferous tubules go to the epididymis where they mature even more. They mature at that point, fully develop, and then they can move along the vas deferens in order to ultimately leave the body, enter into the female to fertilize an egg. Now we'll move on to the hormones that are involved in the male reproductive system, ultimately explaining the function of testosterone. When we looked at the endocrine system in an earlier unit, we talked about the hypothalamus and the role it plays in releasing what are ultimately releasing hormones that go to the anterior pituitary, causing the anterior pituitary to then release its hormones. Two of the hormones that we need to take a look at for the reproductive system, and in fact both the male and female reproductive system, are FSH and LH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. The follicle stimulating hormone ultimately has an effect on the testes that allow for sperm production. So we can think of follicle stimulating hormone. It stimulates these follicles, those precursor cells that ultimately form into sperm within the seminiferous tubules. The luteinizing hormone goes down to the testes and has an effect on the interstitial cells around the seminiferous tubules. It causes the release of testosterone by those interstitial cells. The testosterone plays then a role in the maturation of the sperm cells. It also plays a role in the secondary sexual characteristics that we see in males as they start to produce more and more testosterone during puberty. So males start to develop more muscle as well as axillary and pubic hair and facial hair during puberty. As we looked at earlier in the course, we talked about positive and negative feedback. So as the sperm start to be produced and testosterone is being produced by the luteinizing hormone being released from the anterior pituitary, the testosterone travels around the body, and this acts as a negative feedback system where the testosterone going through the anterior pituitary, or the blood vessels of the anterior pituitary, as well as the blood vessels of the hypothalamus, give negative feedback to tell the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to stop releasing FSH and LH. This maintains homeostasis because as the testosterone goes back to these two glands and tells them to stop releasing FSH and LH, there ends up being a slight decrease over time in testosterone, causing then again a feedback such that the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary cause a release of FSH and LH. So now that we've discussed the function of testosterone and its role in sperm production, let's move on to describe the formation and function of semen. Ultimately, semen is the mixture of sperm and the secretions of the accessory glands of the male reproductive system. To get our bearings here, and again you've previously looked at this through part 2 of this unit, but here we have the urinary bladder that ultimately holds urine prior to its release during micturition. And here we have the anus that ultimately allows for the release of the undigestible materials from our processing of food. We just finished taking a look at the testes and its structure. So stepping back here, we have the scrotum in which we find the testes. At the back of the testes, we have the epididymis. We showed earlier that that's actually where the sperm ultimately mature before traveling up the vas deferens. The earlier image in this presentation stopped at that point, but the vas deferens actually continues up past the urinary bladder and travels ultimately to the ejaculatory duct by the seminal vesicle. Here we have the ejaculatory duct that the vas deferens connects to, and the seminal vesicle will actually release fluid into the ejaculatory duct to help produce the semen. The fluid that the seminal vesicles secrete is a yellowish material rich in substances like fructose, which is a type of sugar. Ultimately, that will give energy to the sperm in order for them to be able to move their flagella. Along with a few other substances, vitamin C and prostaglandins, these substances nourish and activate the sperm as they pass through these ducts. Therefore, it's providing the energy for the flagella to move, but also is activating the sperm to have the flagella begin to move. As the sperm moves through the ejaculatory duct, it actually travels through the prostate gland. The prostate gland actually encircles the upper urethra just below the bladder, as shown in the image here. The prostate gland secretes a milky alkaline or basic substance that plays a role in continuing to increase sperm motility. In addition to that, it counteracts the acidic environment of the vagina, so it helps protect the sperm as they enter into the woman's body. Additionally, during ejaculation, the smooth muscle of the prostate gland contracts and forces the secretions into the urethra. Just as the semen begins to enter into the urethra, there's actually the bulbourethral gland. These glands are tiny glands that secrete thick mucus into the urethra. The mucus serves as a lubricant during intercourse. Then, as we mentioned, the semen moves into the urethra and ultimately travels the length of the penis, and then exits through the glans penis, which is covered by the foreskin.